Hey guys, it's Danny. Today I have quite a fun topic for you. I'm going to show you the orchids that at the moment have some ridiculously tall flower spikes. I mean, visually a little disproportional to the size of the orchid, but beautiful nonetheless. Now, I'm personally more into tiny, compact orchids. They're just so versatile, they fit everywhere. But I have to say, when it comes to showiness, big flowers, long flower spikes, they just have that magnetism that pulls you in and makes you just want them. So I absolutely don't mind having a few of these very, very tall orchids and actually hassle with propping them and stabilizing them. We're gonna get to it. So anyway, hope you'll enjoy today's video, and if you do, don't forget to give it a like, and why not subscribe? It is absolutely free and I post 3 times a week. So before we start with the orchids, let me just address something related to the length of a flower spike that I've been asked for many years at this point. So for many years, there is this idea that circulates in the community, which says that if you want to have longer flower spikes on your orchid, give it less light so that the flower spike stretches towards the light. And I will have to say that in my experience and in my opinion, that really isn't the case. I have never experienced longer flower spikes due to less light. I've actually had the contrary, no flower spike if the light was not sufficient. And Phalaenopsis are the most notorious because they can actually produce very long flower spikes. And I've been growing them, in particular the flower shop ones, for over 10 years right now. And really, it has never been about the light. What I do believe plays an important role is the overall care and culture and the level of stress of the orchid. If your orchid is recovering or has some issues, it simply does not have enough energy to produce its full potential flower spike. Also, if the orchid is very young, it might not actually put out a tall flower spike, again, because it does not have resources to do that just yet. And also, I was never able to convince short flower spiked orchids to produce taller ones. So it is a combination of genetics. If an orchid is genetically programmed to have tiny, compact flower spikes, it will never have tall flower spikes, and also of the overall culture, which influences the stress levels. It's not only about light. Light is a factor, but not in the way that you want to make the flower spike stretch. So yeah, that's how I stand on the matter, because in 10 years, I have never had any visible, palpable reason to think otherwise. And with that said, let's get to the orchids. Alright, so first off, the orchid you saw in the beginning of the video, this is the Oncostele Quedlinburg. If you don't remember it, it's one of the oncidiums we saved in 2019. I think it's one of those that I repotted in that long repotting videos. Well, she's doing great, not fully recovered just yet. We're still working on it. But look at this flower spike. It takes the cake. It is so tall that I had to MacGyver this flower stake, which, do you guys remember it? It's about 8 years old, this flower stake. I brought it with me from Romania. I had it with my first Psychopsis, and this stake is about half the height of the flower spike. I actually measured it, and it is 1 meter tall. I will have the equivalent in inches or feet on the screen. I'm not good at converting to imperial on the spot, but definitely I will Google a converter and put it on the screen. It is ridiculous. And when I say ridiculous, I actually mean it. Because here's the catch. This orchid doesn't naturally exist, in the sense that it is a hybrid. It is not a naturally occurring orchid. And furthermore, it is a complex hybrid. So if you go back in its parentage, you will actually see orchids that have big flowers but tiny flower spikes, and orchids that have tiny flowers but tall flower spikes. And I think you can see where I'm going with this. When you hybridize orchids, you can actually obtain a hybrid which has big and heavy flower spikes, and this orchid has super big flowers, but also tall flower spikes, which don't match. This in nature will absolutely not happen, because the sheer weight of the flowers puts a lot of strain on the rhizome and on the flower spike as well. If I wouldn't have staked it in this way, I'm pretty sure something would have snapped, either the rhizome, either the flower spike. Now, of course, you can say, but wait, in nature they grow hanging, so that takes care of some of the weight. Not necessarily. if it is unbalanced, you can still put a lot of strain on that rhizome, and if the flower spike snaps, there is no purpose for the flowers. Everything needs to be in balance. And the way that I see this orchid right now, and I know it might not translate on camera properly, it is so incredibly heavy, you guys. I almost tilt it too much, and this is a super heavy ceramic pot. It is so heavy, it puts strain on this ceramic pot. So for this reason, I actually have it leaning on a shelf as well, just to make sure, because I don't trust only this pot. It is highly unnatural. But is it beautiful? Yes, it is. I love it. But it's one of those orchids that I do believe I need to be extra careful how I arrange, where I position, because if I'm not careful, this flower spike will damage the orchid. This is the type of orchid that requires your help and intervention because it's highly unnatural what it's doing. So if you have this orchid, do keep this in mind. The flower spikes will be very, very heavy, very, very tall. Next up, I think the orchid some of you expected me to start with when you read the title, the Psychopsis orchid. I'm showing you, I believe, a primary hybrid. It's a very simple hybrid, but the species do look quite identical and behave in the same way. The Psychopsis is one of those very iconic orchids that has very, very tall flower spikes. But here's the catch. The Psychopsis does not produce multiple heavy flowers, but only one at a time. It is actually a sequential bloomer. When the flower on top of the flower spike fades, another bud is ready to go, and in about 3 weeks, it fully opens. And in this way, we're getting the big showy flowers. We're also getting some very, very long-lived flower spikes, but without the strain on the orchid herself. It's absolutely nothing for the Psychopsis to sustain its flowers. It's not leaning over. The only issue with it in cultivation is being careful not to break the flower spike, which can happen. So I always make sure that I have it in a position where I'm not usually present. I don't need to be there. I don't need to do anything in that area because I don't want to damage the flower spike. Now I measured the height of this flower spike as well. It is 52 centimeters compared to the Quedlinburg. Maybe it doesn't sound so showy, but the orchid herself is really, really showy. The flowers are absolutely beautiful as well. Very unusual for an orchid. While the orchid herself is pretty short, I would say, even though you can see the leaves are pretty fleshy and quite wide, quite tall as well in comparison to the pseudobulbs. Really nothing in comparison to the flower spike. This is a super easy orchid to grow. I do have a tutorial on it. It pretty much takes the very same care as Oncidiums, but it is primarily a warm grower. For me, it stopped blooming. It always does that. In wintertime, even though it's not very cold, it's cold enough for me to wear a sweater rather than a t-shirt. It's cold enough for it not to bloom, but it usually picks up somewhere in the spring. In the winter, it actually grows vegetatively for me. It just matured this pseudobulb with this leaf. I'm hoping to see a flower spike soon as well. That'd be great. But as for the flowers, it just stopped blooming. It always does this for the winters that I had up until now. But the good news is the flower spikes can last and rebloom for years and years and years. So don't cut them. And I believe it is a really easy and quite rewarding orchid to grow, even for beginners in a home environment. If you're a little patient, because it's a very slow grower, and if you have a place in your home where you know you're not gonna bother it and you're not gonna snap the flower spike. You don't want to snap the flower spike. That would be very heartbreaking because it's gonna take a little eternity for another flower spike to be formed. Next up, the crowd favorites, the Tolumnias. Now, Tolumnias are my favorite mini orchid. They're so cute and tiny. They fit everywhere. They're easy to care for. Their flower spikes, however, do grow pretty tall. On most of the hybrids, they're not all identical, and at the top of them, they carry beautiful tiny little flowers that look like Oncidiums. These orchids used to be called equitant Oncidiums back in the day. Now they do have a genus of their own, and I aspire to have 100 of them. That's how many I want to have because I love them. Now, the one that I'm showing you has a 24 centimeter tall flower spike, which you might say, well, that's nothing. Yeah, but the orchid herself is 10 centimeters tall, so the flower spike extends 2.5 orchids up, which, if you see it in person, it is quite striking, trust me. Now, I have to say something about Tolumnias. You will read articles that make it a point to be careful with the root system, be careful that you water it in the morning, and that it completely dries until nighttime. And because of this, I believe, pressure that some articles put on new growers, there is a lot of mistakes you can do with Tolumnias. An advice which you may or may not want to take: treat them like any other Oncidium. Yeah, put them in the epiphytic mixture that you like best, in the type of pot that you like best. Make sure it's ventilated. No epiphyte orchid likes to be suffocated at all times. Don't worry if your roots stay wet for 3 days or 4 days. You want to know how I water mine? I sit them in a tray of water. P.S. Don't get this out of context. I am not advising you to share water. Check the video down below in the description for more information. The Tolumnias are the only ones that I do share water with a few individuals at least, because most of them come from the very same place, and it's just much easier for me to grow them like that. But I don't encourage anybody to share water if you don't have to. Anyway, what I was trying to say is, the moment I stopped stressing and fussing about what articles were saying was the moment that I started to have great success with Tolumnias. So I would suggest that you go ahead and treat them like normal epiphytes. Just make sure they're ventilated. Don't stress about how long they stay wet. They actually enjoy moisture a lot. And when they start to become thirsty, you will see the succulent leaves having wrinkles. When you see that, you need to water your Tolumnia, even if you watered it yesterday as well. Provided your Tolumnia has roots, give it water when it's thirsty, not when the articles say so. Other than that, they are a joy to grow, and they're so beautiful. They do bloom quite often, especially when they start to grow multiple fans. Mine have started to do that. So I'm getting ready for a very Tolumnia-filled spring, and I cannot wait to show them to you. They're quite affordable. Usually they go for $10 a piece or something like that, or 10 euros, depending on your location. There are so many hybrids on the market, so many colors to choose from. They're absolutely beautiful and wonderful, but many of them grow very tall flower spikes. Next up, Phalaenopsis orchids. Some of the species, but also quite a lot of the flower shop Phalaenopsis. They have the potential to grow super tall flower spikes. Now, the one that I'm showing you is the Schilleriana, which is notorious for having very beautiful tall displays or pendant displays. And also I have the Bronze Maiden, which is a Schilleriana hybrid and inherited the same trait. Now, mine is quite young. It is actually a keiki that I separated from a mother plant, and this year it is producing a much taller flower spike, but it absolutely is not the full potential. This particular flower spike is 52 centimeters tall, but really at full maturity, I would not be surprised if this orchid would produce a 1 meter long flower spike, plus branches. It is that beautiful and showy. And some of the flower shop Phalaenopsis can produce these long flower spikes as well, because they do have the Schilleriana in their parentage, or a different species, maybe the Amabilis, which can produce tall flower spikes. So the hybrids will do the very same thing, provided good conditions. Now, just because flower shop Phalaenopsis can do that doesn't mean they will, because there are more species involved in their parentage. Maybe some of them are polychylous, which are notorious for having shorter flower spikes and fewer blooms. So depending how the genes mixed, you can have a flower shop phal with taller or shorter flower spikes. And this is why I was saying that I don't think light has any super meaningful impact. I think genetics and overall stress levels are much more important in this aspect, but indeed you can have quite a lot of flower shop phals having super tall and full of flowers displays, especially the white ones, because most of them have the Amabilis in their parentage, which again can produce pretty long flower spikes. So yeah, if you want an easy to find, easy to care for, showy flower spiked orchid, definitely try your typical Phalaenopsis. Next up, an orchid that I really don't want to move too much because it is full of buds everywhere. This is my Gongora quinquenervis. Not sure how to pronounce it. It has some of the most beautiful, tallest, or actually more pendant flower spikes that I own. I measured one of the flower spikes at 63 centimeters, which is quite impressive. And the flowers, yeah, as you can see, they do resemble little dragons or little birds. I like to call Gongoras mother of dragons, although not all Gongoras have this flower shape. My Galeata actually does not look like this, but it has the same type of flower ring. The downside with this orchid is that the flowers do not last, and I had quite a few questions about it. Nope, just like the Sanhopias, Gongoras don't have long-lasting flowers, and it's a shame because the flower spikes that I have will probably open one by one, so they didn't sync up. I'm not gonna have that beautiful full flower show. I would much rather have a short but plentiful flower show than a flower spike now, one a little later, and so on. But hey, what? Oh my goodness, you guys, I just saw something as I'm sitting here recording. Let me just show you what I saw. Okay, sorry for interrupting this. It's genuine reaction here. My Phragmipedium is producing a bud right here. So exciting! It's one of the few Phragmipediums that I still have left, and it's doing great in this self-watering pot still. Okay, back to the video. Very nice, a very nice discovery. Okay, back to the Gongora. As you can see, I have flowers on the floor everywhere, but those are from the Gongora. Yeah, they're not long-lasting, sadly, but they smell really nice, they look really nice. The orchid herself is pretty tall. I mean, it's an impressive orchid, and the flower spikes are, I don't know if tall is the right way of calling them. They're lengthy and they're beautiful. So if you much more prefer pendant displays, abundant displays, oh, Gongoras are perfect for that. And there are quite a few other orchids related to them. I think the Acineta is in the same category. Not sure how long the flowers on that one last, but yeah, all of these orchids which are related, the Stanhopias, Gongoras, they're not known for long-lasting flowers, quite the opposite. So I'm sad to answer to you guys, no, the flowers don't last, sadly. Even so, I think the show is totally worth it. Next up, another crowd favorite. This is the Frances Fox, which is not in bloom anymore, but we did have it in bloom last month, I think. Yeah, this orchid has very tall flower spikes as well. I measured this one to 47 centimeters, which is still very notable. And this trait actually comes from the former Schomburgia, current Myrmecophila parent that it has. Myrmecophilas can actually create super tall flower spikes. I mean 1 meter tall or so, or even more. Fun fact, I do have the Tibicins as well, which is one of the parents. I just purchased it, it's fairly young, it's gonna take a while, but at some point, if you stick around for a few years, subscribe to my channel, we might actually see its parent in bloom, which I'm pretty sure will overtake the length of the Frances Fox. Now, if you didn't know about this orchid and you have been mesmerized by the flowers like everybody is, me included, I do actually have a video on how to care for this orchid, its quirks and such, a lot more information that I'm sharing with you today. I'll link you to it down below in the description. It is one of those orchids which I do believe it's a staple in orchid collections, particularly if you do good with cattleyas and you have very hot climates, environments, grow space, and so on. This orchid can take a lot of heat. The more the better, actually. So especially for those of you who don't really do all that great with a reblooming flower shop Phalaenopsis due to the temperature, try this one. And cattleyas generally and related genera. You're not gonna be disappointed, and probably you're not gonna miss Phalaenopsis either. Let's just say that. I love cattleyas more than phals. I do. I have to say it. Although summer bloomer phals, yes please, 100 of them. And lastly, some Paphiopedilums can actually have super tall flower spikes as well, especially compared to the mother plant, which is rather wide than tall. And these guys, in my experience, do produce quite tall flower spikes. The American hybrid as well, which is another flower shop orchid, very, very common here in Europe, at least at times. That one measures 33 centimeters in height, which, again, if you look at the entire display, is quite tall. Certainly not as tall as the Frances Fox or the Quedlinburg, but honestly, especially with the Quedlinburg, I am struggling. It's a little bit of a hassle. I much more prefer these types of displays where I can only place a hook type of stake or even a normal stake and the flower is secure. It's not in danger of tipping over the pot or anything. But as you can see, Paphiopedilums can have short flower spikes as well. And no matter how much I would ask this orchid to produce taller flower spikes, it will not, because genetics. It doesn't mean the orchid is not receiving enough light. All of my paphs grow under the same conditions, under the same type of light. They're all on the same shelf. So if tall and showy displays are what you're into, just research the type of orchids which can do that, so you don't get disappointed when your orchid produces a tiny, compact flower spike. Now, before I let you go, I'm going to show you one more orchid which is pertinent to this discussion. I noticed it when we looked at the Phragmipedium. They're in the same place. Remember how I tell you that I always like to cut away existing flower spikes on Phalaenopsis orchids to let the orchid focus on vegetative growth and brand new showy flower spikes in the flowering season? Well, what I did with this one was leave all of the structures from last year be, just to kind of prove a point of why I'm saying cutting existing flower spikes can actually improve future flower spikes. And this one has an old flower spike here which continued growth now in the winter, or continued blooming actually. And here we actually have a seed pod. I'm not interested in the seeds. This was for a different video. I left it be because I wanted these structures to consume energy and see the impact on the brand new flowering. And look at this. Can we see how tiny this flower spike be? Not only, or actually is. Not only that, but this orchid sadly didn't grow much vegetatively. I think, yeah, it only produced this leaf, which is not impressive. So even though this orchid was meant for a different type of video, it can actually apply to what I was telling you today. I don't think the length of the flower spike has much to do with the quantity of light in the sense of stretching towards the light. It has more to do with the overall stress or the available energy the orchid has. And in this case, the orchid focused a lot on all of these other things, and the new flower spike is a quarter of what it actually should be, which is no coincidence and has nothing to do with anything else. I didn't change anything in its environment. I just let all of these other structures just steal energy. I'm gonna get rid of them. It's okay. The orchid is pretty strong, it has roots, she is not in danger. That's the last thing I want to do, but I will use it in a different video. But I think it's the perfect way to end this video and show you that, yeah, in my experience, other things do determine the length of the flower spike. And even if the quantity of light will have some type of effect, I'm not sure if it has the effect the article suggests, or if it does, I don't think it's very noticeable, if at all. So that said, thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope you liked the orchids that I showed you. So with that said, I hope you have a great day. Subscribe to my channel for more orchid videos, tutorials, experiments, updates, and other fun orchid subjects. If you wish to support the channel, do consider becoming a member or visit the merch store linked down below in the description. You can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook. It's always nice to stay in touch there as well. And I'll see you all next time. Bye!